Good afternoon, everyone. I know we'll have a few more folks still joining us, but we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Cram-Helwick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Urban Debate League, a program of Augsburg University. I'm excited to welcome you to our panel conversation this afternoon, and before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about our program. The Minnesota Urban Debate League provides academic competitive debate programs for over 1,000 students in 3 school districts. Our programs include national topic debate for middle and high school students, Spanish debate, East African debate, financial literacy leadership debate, and our summer debate camps held here at Augsburg University. This past year's national debate topic was criminal justice reform. Students from LA to New York City and everywhere in between debated solutions to the criminal justice system. You'll hear more from our students and panelists in just a moment about this important topic. But I did want to share with you why I believe debate is so important. We are a pipeline program for Augsburg University because debate is an excellent activity for preparing students for college and career. Students who participate in debate become the champions of their own story. They achieve these outcomes as a part of a team, striving together. Nationally peer-reviewed published research, as well as our research partnership with Minneapolis Public Schools, has found that students who participate in debate have higher test scores, GPAs, enrollment in advanced classes, confidence, and persistence to achieve their goals. Now, to be honest, it was a gut-wrenching year for so many of us in education. I'm proud of our team and the students that we were able to move to doing debate online, but I am really looking forward to all of us being back together soon. Our students are amazing, and I'm excited to introduce you to them, and then we will introduce you to our panelists for our conversation. During the conversation, we will have an open chat, and we encourage folks to engage one another respectfully on the topic. Now, let me introduce you to our amazing students. First up is we have Emily Horn, who is a graduating senior of Central High School and began participating in debate her freshman year. She is a certified nursing assistant and plans to major in social justice law and pre-medicine at Smith College. Next, we have Michael O'Neill. He is a junior at Roseville Area High School. He is the co-captain for his debate team and has been debating for 3 years now. He enjoys playing basketball and reading. And if you were to know one thing about Michael, it would have to be that he is mixed in every way. He is white and Black. He has cops in his family and those who unjustly died at the hands of cops. And at the end of the day, whether cop or citizen, he believes we all just want a better world. I also want to introduce you to Gabe Chang Deutsch, who unfortunately, it looks like he might not be able to join us, but I want you to know about him anyway. Gabe just graduated, from Minneapolis South, and he debated there for 4 years and has headed to college in the fall. He loves debate and it's his favorite activity, but he also loves to bike and ski in his free time. And finally, we have Shikamso Shigioki. She is a junior at Como Park Senior in St. Paul. A debater of 4 years, she keeps herself busy by dabbling in art, learning, writing, and always being concerned with topics like this. I'm excited for all of you to meet our students. Now I'm going to hand it over to Amelie, and she is going to be starting our introduction of our panelists.
Hello, I'm going to be introducing Judge Jeffrey Bryan, who was appointed to the bench 8 years ago. He has served the last 2 years on the Minnesota Court of Appeals. Along with Commissioner Carter, he co-chaired the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative in Ramsey County, focusing on juvenile justice reforms. He grew up in El Paso, Texas, where his mother was a high school debate coach, and he competed in speech and debate throughout middle school and high school. He has served on the board of the MNUDL since 2013.
Thank you, Amy. I'm grateful to be here. I'm really happy to have had the chance to get to know Amy a little bit and to learn from the moderators today. I hope it's a good panel and want to thank everybody for coming.
Guess I'm next. Hi, my name is Michael O'Neill, and I'll be introducing Commissioner Tony Carter. Elected by the voters of District 4 in March 2005, Commissioner Tony Carter has led on important issues at the local, state, and national level. And as chair of the Ramsey County Commissioners, Commissioner Carter has led several Ramsey County system change efforts, such as the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, that has reduced the number of youth held at Ramsey County's Juvenile Center, and increased system and community alternatives for low-risk youth. She is engaged with school, community, and intergovernmental partners in strategic collaboratives for child safety, student achievement, and youth development, including through the St. Paul Children's Collaborative and the St. Paul Promise Neighborhood. A member of Governor Walz's Children's Cabinet Advisory, she continues to work with statewide stakeholders to ensure comprehensive support to enhance Minnesota's support for children and families. Commissioner Carter has received numerous awards for her work in the community and in the arts and arts education, including an honorary doctorate in humane letters from Concordia University, St. Paul.
Thank you so very much, Michael, and all of you. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
And then also, sorry, since Gabe can't be here, I will also be introducing, John Choi. John Choi is a Ramsey County attorney, and since taking office in 2011, John has become a state and national leader in progressive justice reform, working with public officials and impacting communities to reimagine justice and the role of prosecutors. John's innovative approach to holding abusers accountable while working collaboratively with advocacy agencies to help victims has transformed the way government intervenes in domestic violence and sex trafficking situations. He is currently working to do the same for victims of sexual assault. And in addition, John has been a champion of raising boys and engaging men to prevent violence against women and girls, and successfully advocating to reform state drug sentencing laws and reinvest savings in community-based solutions. He's also transforming his office to better address underlying causes of justice involvement, respond more assertively to youth, give people second chances, and remove the scarlet letter of a conviction once people have rehabilitated and atoned for their mistakes.
Thank you, Michael, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. I want to thank the Minnesota Urban Debate League for the leadership and pulling all of this together, and the moderators today and my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
And finally, I'm Chikamso, and it's my honor to introduce Attorney General Keith Ellison. Attorney General Ellison was sworn in as Minnesota's 30th Attorney General on January 7, 2019. And as the people's lawyer, Attorney General Ellison's job is to help Minnesotans afford their lives and live with dignity, safety, and respect. His guiding values are generosity and inclusion. From 2007 to 2018, Keith Ellison represented Minnesota's 5th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he championed consumer, worker, environmental, and civil and human rights protections for Minnesotans. Before being elected to Congress, Attorney General Ellison served 4 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and prior to entering elective office, he spent 16 years as an attorney specializing in civil rights and defense law, including 5 years as an executive director for the Legal Rights Center. And as the leader of public interest law firm, he oversaw a team of attorneys focused on delivering justice for Minnesotans who had nowhere else to turn. He is also a noted community activist. Attorney General Ellison received his law degree from the University of Minnesota Law School in 1990. He's a proud father of 4 adult children, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elijah, and Amira. He's the first African American and the first Muslim American to be elected in statewide office in Minnesota.
Hello, everybody. What a pleasure to be with you and to discuss one of the most important issues in our society today, criminal justice reform. I can't think of a more important, more timely topic for you to debate and discuss and to bring light and maybe even give us some good solutions on what we do as a society. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for inviting me.
We'll get started now with our first segment. In debate, a lot of what we talk about is theory. It's something that we research extensively no matter what our topic is. So the idea of what justice is and what the idea of criminality is has been a huge discussion over the last year. So our first question for the panelists is, what are the primary purposes of our criminal justice laws and social justice and justice system? Are our criminal laws serving those purposes, or are there areas that we should consider decriminalizing as part of criminal justice reform? And whoever has thoughts can jump right in.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I am going to give the citizen response, if you will, and I'll count on the others who are all attorneys and much more knowledgeable in the law to give that professional response. You know, as I see it, we have the opportunity to live together as human beings in society, in community. And so, of course, there need to be laws about how we treat each other. Our criminal laws, clearly important to ensure that we can be safe and secure in our communities, in our homes, in our schools, wherever we are, from harm. And so it is very important that our laws are enforced and that we are able to assess when someone has been mistreated, because that mistreatment can lead to harm and opposite, of course, what we want for everyone, the lack of well-being. We want everyone to be able to be well in our community. So it's important that we have those laws. I think the second part of that question is, what should we consider decriminalizing? And I'll answer that by just inverting what I just said. We definitely want those laws to protect us so that we can all be well. But sometimes those laws can work against us in cases where individuals may, in poverty, not have the same ability to support their lives in a way in which the law dictates it should be supported. So let's say a broken taillight, is an example of perhaps something that someone just didn't have the funds to repair. And so our laws need to flex in acknowledgement that everyone doesn't come in at the same level financially, perhaps. There are also cases where children may not go to school, and that could be a case where we prosecute for child neglect. And in that case, maybe our laws should have some way of decriminalizing what could be a parent that needed to be at work and not able to, in the same way, support that school attendance and help for that, perhaps as well. There are other ways in which maybe building codes can criminalize individuals who may have reasons that they weren't able to repair something. So again, in a neophyte kind of way, I would just like to suggest that our laws and the enforcement of those laws and the prosecution should be about keeping us all well. And when we see the laws may not promote that, then we should be considering how we mitigate against that as well. Now let me ask
this is
register.
So Keith Ellison here. I could offer a few reflections. Every single thing that Commissioner Carter said is absolutely right. Everything she said is right. Let me add on a little bit to what she said. So in our country, it's true that the criminal law is designed to protect people, keep them safe from harm, keep them secure. But it's also true that for 250 years, our nation was a slaveholding nation. And for 100 years after that, we had a Jim Crow society. And ever since the end of that, I'd mark at about 1965, we've had a society of inequity disparity in almost every aspect of American life, much of it deriving from that original sin of slavery, then Jim Crow, and now what I call institutional societal racism, has not only been targeted at African American people. Our country passed a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act, designed to keep people of Chinese ancestry from being able to immigrate to the United States. Also, during World War II, did Japanese internment, where they said Japanese people who were full American citizens took their property, made them move off the West Coast, and made them live in concentration camps. And we've also had laws regarding people of Latino background. Some of you may not know that the Brown versus Board of Education case decided in 1954 had a number of companion cases, which included people who were Mexican American, where they were being discriminated against in schools and in other aspects of life as well. And so it's true that our criminal laws are designed to keep us safe. It's also true that where we have vertical hierarchies that are not just, the criminal law has been employed to maintain those vertical hierarchies in the course of our nation's history. In fact, when captivity was ended, we passed the 13th Amendment, and the 13th Amendment said you cannot require anybody to engage in involuntary servitude unless they're convicted of a crime. And then you saw a lot of Black people suddenly get caught up in the criminal justice system for things that whites would never be convicted for. And in the antebellum period, there were crimes that Black people could be convicted of that white people could never be convicted of, such as running away. For 250 years, if you were a Black person and you ran away, you'd be charged with the crime of theft. Theft of what? Yourself. You were property of someone else and you deprived that someone else of yourself. And that would be a crime. And it seems almost impossible to believe it in 2021, but that system of law existed longer than the system of law that we have now, right here in these United States. It was a crime for a Black person to read a book. You could not legally be allowed to read. Now today, and also it would be a crime for a white person to teach a Black person to read. They too could be in trouble, not as much trouble as a Black person would be for reading, but there were punishments for whites teaching Blacks to read. And then after that, after slavery was ended, it would be a crime for you to get married to someone who was not of your same race or color. Now, if you were a brown person, any of them could marry each other who wanted to. A Chinese person could marry a Black person, a Native American could marry a Latino person, didn't really care. But it was illegal to pollute the purity of whiteness. And there were miscegenation laws which made it a crime right up until 1968 for a white person to marry a non-white person. And in 16 states of the union, you could go to jail for it. In fact, Mr. and Mrs. Loving did go to jail for it and were given fines and spent a few days in jail for it and were banished from their home state of Virginia for it. So it is important to note, yes, the criminal law is for our protection. It is also, in an unfair society, been used for oppression. And we cannot ignore that. Now, even after the laws, even after we ended Jim Crow and we said we're not going to have any more Black codes, no more codes that say Mexicans can't live here, Blacks can't live there, Chinese people can't live there. We got rid of all those laws in the 1960s. By the way, I was born in 1963, so I think of myself as a young man, but I was born in American apartheid. Absolutely. And so the bottom line is there is the explicit racialization of laws, and then there is laws that are neutral on their face but applied in an unfair way. A lot of the marijuana laws, if you're black, you can get arrested for those things. If you're white, you can get arrested, but you seldom ever do. The system uses discretion to let some people get away with certain things and punishes other people very harshly. So those are just a few thoughts. I can tell you this, there was a great man one day. His name was Martin Luther King, and he quoted another great man named St. Augustine, who said, an unjust law is no law at all. And just remember, Martin Luther King was arrested over 30 times for breaking the law. What law? The law that said you people can't sit here, can't ride there, can't go here, can't do this, can't do that. And that was the law of the land. And Adolf Hitler got elected and did a lot of horrible things, but they were all legal. Don't ever believe that law and morality are the same thing. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Attorney General, for that really important framing and the historical context of our criminal justice system. And I, as you added to the brilliant remarks of Commissioner Carter, I want to add a little bit to kind of what you have had to say. I think that very much that our laws and our justice system is a reflection of society's values, but whose values? And I think that we have to reckon with the fact that many times the way that laws have been passed in this country and enforced by police and prosecutors, we have to, I believe, in order to actually do criminal justice reform, we have to be connected to that history. I think most Minnesotans, most Americans don't know or understand the genesis of our criminal justice system and how it's played out for many Americans. I think that in so many ways, if you think about the genesis of this country and you think about how the justice system started, it was a product of trying to help those who were wealthy. And so we have the Sixth Amendment, which says that everybody can have a right to a jury trial. And I think if we think about how that has actually kind of evolved over time, what you can see, and I think one of the things about justice reform is that we should always be asking ourselves, is what we're doing, are the laws that we're enforcing just, as Attorney General Ellison said, is it working out for all Americans? And if you really critically look at the justice system, I think what we would find is that it's actually producing things that we don't want. I think today, more and more people are paying attention to the justice system, which is why we're in this era of criminal justice reform, because they're not liking what they're seeing. We have massive disparity in how policing happens, how prosecutions happen, how our court systems are run. So in order to change all of that, I think the first thing that we need to do is take a journey, as Attorney General has asked us to do, to actually, first of all, we have to acknowledge as a society, and those of us who are leaders in the system, about the historical and the current injustices that exist today in our justice system. If you think about, just from my perspective as the prosecutor, ever since, let's say, the emancipation of slavery, we had a history of terror lynchings in this country that you could not, once you get oriented to what happened in this country, it is just stark, it's frightening. And it wasn't that far back ago, but yet who was held accountable for those particular crimes, right? And then today, I talked a little bit about the Sixth Amendment. We believe that somehow in our justice system, we will have, after we have a jury trial, we'll have the truth, we'll have accountability. But that's not the way that it's working out for many people. In fact, we've had many situations where people have been unjustly convicted. And one of the biggest lies in America is that everybody gets a jury trial. In fact, it doesn't happen that way. Less than 2% of the cases that are filed by prosecutors actually result in a jury trial. In fact, we have the system of plea bargaining and detention before people are convicted. And so there's just so many things to unpack. But I want to thank especially Attorney General Ellison for making sure that we're grounded in the history, because we can't start reform. We can't do transformation without fully understanding and acknowledging the past and current injustices that exist.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. I think there's a lot that I've learned from my fellow panelists, especially Commissioner Carter and John Choi, as the three of us sat on a lot of meetings and committees looking at the administration of justice in Ramsey County, what we could do to improve that. One of the things I remember is hearing both of them talk about the tools that we have at our disposal, and asking the question, okay, let's assume for the moment that the purpose of criminal law is to provide public safety. Are the tools available, whether that's probation or it's some kind of public health focus prior to someone being brought into the criminal justice system, are those tools really helping achieve public safety? And sometimes the answer was yes. Many times the answer was a no, and that they didn't reduce the risk of criminal activity, and to rethink the purpose of the tools that we have is something I think we should all be doing. And I'm grateful to listen, in some ways be an audience member more than a panelist today. And I agree wholeheartedly that our leaders, whether you're a judge or a policymaker or a policy debater for that matter, you're a leader in your high schools, and you will be leaders in college and in our society. It's really important to be critical and think critically of how the laws are made and what we can do to improve on that, because there is a long way to go in the multiracial democracy that is our country, that has only been around for a few decades in that context. It's a very young multiracial democratic experiment that we're in the midst of here. And you don't have to go back too far to see criminalized behaviors, as Attorney General Ellison was saying. Even our moderators were born after some of these laws were still in place. You think of Lawrence v. Texas that overruled Bowers v. Hardwick, and you think of the criminalization of immigrants, people who have migrated to this country. There are a lot of things that you could think critically of right now in our society and question whether or not that's really providing for public safety, and who that really is benefiting.
Yeah, great points from our panelists. And moving on to the next section, this section deals with the relationship between the criminal justice system and youth, so especially juvenile justice reform. So my question for you all is, how is the juvenile system different than the adult criminal justice system? And do those differences help or hinder reform efforts?
Well, I think one of the most important things to recognize about the primary purpose of the youth justice system is to focus on rehabilitation. And I think that's so critical for us to recognize that kids are kids. And we've got to understand and actually start practicing this notion that brain development isn't fully developed until the age of 25. The definition of youth actually does go up through the age of 24. And I think those principles are really important. But I think historically, again, we in many ways as a society lost our way. Go back, maybe about 20, 30 years when the concept of a youthful juvenile super predator started to emerge, and we started passing draconian laws. And then we started certifying adults or youth as adults more than we ever should have. I mean, there are people in our state prison system who have been convicted when they were 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age, who are currently right now, as I speak, in prison. And so today, I think there's a better understanding of it, but still we have a really long ways to go. But I think the big piece of that is to recognize that the primary purpose of the youth justice system is about rehabilitation, and then to think about ways in which we can actually accomplish that. And I think that much like, I think the definition of insanity is to do things the same way and expect different results, right? And I think in many ways we believe somehow that processing somebody through court and somehow that whole process can lead to like some sort of a better outcome. And I think we have to recognize that we have to think about community-based types of solutions that really ask our community, but we have to resource them and also empower them to find some of these solutions. I think that one of the things that people don't realize is that 65% of all of the kids who are referred to my office will never, ever come back. 65%, right? And so we don't have to do very much with the young kids who are coming in for the first time. But then we have instances where we've got kids who are coming in multiple times. In fact, we have a youth who have been referred to our office, more than like 40, 50 times. Are we actually making a difference for those youth? I think that we need to start thinking about different ways that we engage community to try to figure out ways to intervene in these situations, and not believe that the only way to do that is through the juvenile justice system. In Ramsey County, I know Commissioner Carter is going to be talking about Juvenile Detention's Alternatives Initiative. But one of the things that we've been doing in Ramsey County is that we've reduced the number of cases that have been sent to us. Last year, we had 1,750 cases referred to our office. That is the lowest that we've ever been. Traditionally, we're usually around 3,000, 4,000 cases referred to our office. So one of the important pieces of youth justice reform is shrinking that footprint of what police are doing, what prosecutors are doing, and what the court is actually needing to pay attention to. I believe that we can get better outcomes if we recognize this important notion of doing harm reduction, number one, and then secondly, doing intensive intervention, but through a community-based lens for those who have, and those youth who are coming in over and over again. I can tell you without hesitation that what a lot of those young people are experiencing is that they have experienced immense trauma in their life. There's instability. There's a whole bunch of things that's going on, and I think that we would have a better outcome if we resource community and we had wraparound services and we took a different, more of a public health response to our younger people who are connected to the justice system.
Yeah, this is Keith. Thank you for laying that out, County Attorney Choi. I think you're absolutely right, and you start the conversation off right. The juvenile system, the point is rehabilitation, but the truth is, there's a lot of history there too. In our United States, there was a young man named George Stinney, youngest person ever to get the death penalty in the United States of America. He was about 14 years old. And you could look up his case and read about George Stinney, who was electrocuted. Over the course of time, our society realized that juveniles are different, and we did have a separate juvenile system with the point of being rehabilitation. But we've always treated people differently based on who they are, race and background. And so in many ways, the juvenile system for young people of color has been a lot like the adult system. But there was a significant period of time, between say 1910 about 1920, 30, 40, when, we did recognize that there was an important need to rehabilitate. But as you saw more African Americans get into the criminal justice system, as the agricultural society began to give way to an industrial society and urbanization began, the criminal justice system responded and began to treat juveniles a lot like adults because of who the juveniles were and what their background and history was. And this all really kind of culminated, I'd say, in the 1970s and 80s when the idea of the super predator became to be our policy. And it was a bipartisan thing. It wasn't Republicans or Democrats, it was both who came to the conclusion that, kids were maybe not redeemable and maybe not able to be rehabilitated. And you began to see adult certification used more frequently, and you began to see EJJ laws that we passed here in Minnesota, and you began to see much harsher treatment for young people. But then along came a very important case, which I'd like you all to think about. It's known as the Miller case, Miller versus Alabama. In that case, in 2012, said, wait up, hold on. We now know that the brain development of a child, and County Attorney Choi already mentioned this, isn't even complete till around 25. Young people are impulsive by virtue of being a young person. They don't think through consequences by virtue of being a young person. And to judge them the same way you would somebody older simply isn't fair. And that was a Supreme Court case in 2012, Miller versus Alabama. If you guys might want to really debate some of the issues around that case, very important case. And we have Miller related issues going on right now. I mean, so Miller basically said you can't give life imprisonment to somebody for a crime they committed under the age of 18. Well, what about 18 in one day? What about 18 in 1 month? What about 18? What about 19? We're still giving kids life without the possibility of parole, meaning you leave in a casket, who are 18 in 1 week. And that's what the state of Minnesota law says is the law today. I wish it were different. If you commit a heinous offense, and again, these offenses are all horrible, right? We're talking about kids who may have killed their parents or committed a murder or a very, very horrible case. But the bottom line is you can't treat them the same way that you would an adult. And I think one of the pieces of unfinished business of juvenile law reform is to say that you cannot give somebody who committed a crime, I think, under the age of 25, life without the possibility of parole. You shouldn't be able to give them that kind of time without ever doing a psychological evaluation on them. You shouldn't be able to give them that kind of time without ever giving them some sort of a pre-sentence investigation where you really explore the family circumstances that led them to that heinous offense. And I can tell you that I hope as a member of the pardon board that we really look at a lot of these cases where crimes were committed at an early age, where we know that the brain development has not been completed. And I think that this is something that is definitely unmet need that we need to focus our attention on.
Thank you. I always learn so much when I'm on with distinguished panelists such as are on here today. And I just want to share that when I first became a commissioner in Ramsey County back in 2005, I was very alarmed to learn the trajectories of, most of the folks who end up in our prisons. And as I looked at the great disparities that existed around youth offending and youth detention in Ramsey County and across the nation to learn that, as we now know, most offenders have been victims. And the young people who were in our justice system, many had been in our out-of-home placement system, having suffered child abuse or neglect and having been in out-of-home placement. The next step for them was entering into our detention center systems and then through the courts and coming back again and again and again. And eventually many would end up in our adult systems. So everyone has mentioned trauma already. And I think a big difference between our juvenile systems or young offender systems and our adult systems is the opportunity to more holistically examine and truly to be able to address that trauma if we don't look just at the tools that we have in the justice system, but if we look at all of the resources that we have and acknowledging that young people can sometimes come from circumstances that require our immediate attention to address, that those young people always come, or most of them anyway, with families, and that those families have needs, and that we have resources as a community that we can apply to those needs. So looking at all of the systems and not just that justice system is critical and important as we look at the opportunity to help families stabilize and address those issues. They may be chemical abuse, or they could be mental health issues, simply poverty sometimes that affect them in their lives and for which they need help. It could be work, and the inability to find that work. So we have a plethora of ways in which we can help families. County Attorney Choi mentioned the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiatives in Ramsey County. And the bottom of that is that we can find other ways besides punishment, spending time in a cell, that we can help young people move from being offenders to having better trajectories for their lives. And so we are looking more fully at how we walk hand in hand with those children and their families, taking a public health approach, and knowing that we have to help find the cause and then help address those causes in order to help that child and her family be well in the long term. So those are the kinds of systems that, because of people like those who are here with us today, we have been able to more fully explore. And quite frankly, as we look at our budgets in Ramsey County and we look at how much we spend on the justice system versus how much we spend in public health, we are thinking about ways in which we help to redesign our systems so that when we find a child offending or a young person offending, we're able to not only address what is very important, and that is community safety, but we're also able to look at how to help design better outcomes to occur for that child. And we're also looking at how we treat one child differently than another, as we did find that for the same offense, a child of color would find far different consequences and deeper engagement in our criminal justice system than would a white child in 2005. So we've been working to just get our heads around how we treat people differently and what we need to make sure that we are able to find equitable outcomes for all children in our community, which also means for families as well.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Carter undersells her own impact here in Ramsey County. This is and John Choi as well. Ramsey County has been a national example of criminal justice reform in the juvenile system, and it's because of leaders like John Choi and Commissioner Carter. The thing that makes, in my view, different, makes the juvenile justice system different is what we think of as accountable, or how we measure accountability for the offense is different, because unlike in the adult system, we don't come in with the presumption that the person charged with the crime is the only person accountable for that behavior. As a juvenile, you understand that accountability comes from so many different areas. That allows us to look into their backgrounds, to understand the impact of trauma. And the other thing that would be different to me is that there's more involvement. And I know Dr. Gothard is in the audience. He had signed up for today, and he also is someone who has worked in Ramsey County with Commissioner Carter and John Choi to address these issues, and you see it playing out. And it's one of the reasons I think that the numbers are lower is because of a different response to behavior in a school setting over the last 5 to 10 years. And the involvement of the schools, the involvement of the public health officials, the involvement of community activists. I think we'll have a chance to talk about the novel ways that in Ramsey County there is a power sharing, empowering community activists to have a larger role in where public funds are spent and how you evaluate those decisions. So there are things we can learn, I think, from the reforms that have occurred in Ramsey County, and apply those to the adult system as well, and looking at what restorative practices can we focus on, looking at what does accountability mean, why is this person in front of the courtroom at this time in their lives, and what can be done to reduce that person's risk of reoffending and restore the community. So I think that's the focus from the juvenile context that helps reform that we can hopefully import into the adult context as well.
Okay, I would just like to say that it's an honor to hear all of your responses. I'm sure as everybody else in the Zoom would agree. I think that you've all had amazing responses, but I think that we should get on to the next segment. Just really quick, touching on back what Keith Ellison was talking about earlier, back in the first segment, about this idea that a lot of what people of color, or just in general, a lot of ideas from slavery continue on to now, and so that while we may not be enslaved any longer, while people of color don't necessarily face that type of oppression, a lot of the injustices today stem from that. And in the debate space, I personally dedicate myself to talking about that, specifically through something called the Afro-pessimism critique, which is just specifically looking at how things like sentencing, say like for our criminal justice topic this year, how sentencing is affected by these ideas of criminality that originally began with slavery and looking at the slave as the criminal. And then therefore, like Keith Ellison was saying, that moved on to the Black body. So the 13th Amendment came and they could no longer call Black people slaves and justify them as the criminal. So then what they did was justify Blackness as the criminal. It's not being a slave, which it makes you criminal or engage in criminal activities, but your skin tone, who you are. And so since I feel that even in the debate space with people who are actively trying to learn, with people who want to make a better world and become leaders, I feel like structural racism in our criminal justice system always comes as like a tag at the end. It always comes as like, oh yeah, we'll also fix that in addition. So what I wanted to ask specifically is, how do you believe structural racism exists in our criminal justice system today? And how do we deal with different perceptions of, like, how do we deal with those different perceptions within it?
Thank you, Michael. It's like asking, where's the justice in the criminal justice system? we do have a big difference in experiences, and the reasons to I think are clear, and we've discussed them. The first step is acknowledging the injustice done by our laws and our courts, and committing ourselves to improving that. The judicial branch relies on legitimacy and public trust and confidence. And so it is really important. I think it's the biggest challenge facing our system, that very question that you've asked. And there's not really an easy answer to it.
Well, I think Judge Bryan has framed it very well. I mean, we can't have a legitimate criminal justice system if we have growing numbers of people who can see the injustices, right? Or who want a different type of system. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the path forward. I think that in order for us to move forward, the first step, and as Judge Bryan talked about, is that recognizing and grounding ourselves in the history and the acknowledgments that really need to happen in the context of the current systems that we've inherited. I mean, people at my office and judges and et cetera didn't come to work wanting to create this system. We inherited, but we have to recognize that we perpetuate it every day when we continue to do the same thing without questioning the outcomes that we are producing. And so a big part of, I think, to get to reform and transformation is not for the system leaders to believe that they have all of the answers. Quite frankly, in many ways, the systems have failed many communities. And so it's so critical that we figure out a way, and we're doing this in Ramsey County, to share power with communities that have been negatively impacted by the justice system and give them a seat at the table to help inform and direct how we might spend our money, how we might establish our policies, and how we ultimately do our work, which should be in collaboration and in partnership with communities, but especially those communities that have been most impacted. That's actually doing race equity work. One of the things that I think that people in the justice profession, we have been raised to believe that the way to truth and justice is to treat everybody the same. And we have to recognize that in order for us to unpack and deliver a better version of justice for all Minnesotans, that we have to actually start practicing race equity or equity. That we at times will need to be thinking differently about not just putting everybody into one size fits all justice system and thinking about how to meet each individual person as they come into the system to, number one, see their human dignity, and then number two, to recognize that every person in every situation is different and their needs are different, and that we should calibrate our responses in a way that can ultimately lead to those better outcomes. I think that's one of the biggest struggles that we have in the justice system today, because so many of us were, it was beat into our head that we treat everybody the same. So one particular example, and I'm just so passionate about it, is what we do around recognizing collateral consequences. People experience convictions in a very, very different way. If you are not a citizen of the United States, but a permanent resident, and you have a 5th-degree drug conviction, you are subject to removal from this country. Whereas somebody who is a United States citizen, they would get probation at the worst. But we have a disparate system because of the status of an individual. And so I think that the justice system needs to meet people where they're at. We need to recognize also trauma and take that into consideration as we make justice decisions. And we should be very intentional about reducing racial disparity. We'll never reduce it unless we take an equitable lens to it. If we keep believing that equality is the path forward, we will then continue to impose a one-size-fits-all justice system on everybody. And that one-size-fits-all was built for the majority.
You know, I've heard sprinkles of the words collateral consequences, you know, as a part of what we've been talking about, impacted individuals. And I would just want to underscore that in Ramsey County, as we move toward making certain that we're making the best decisions, we can't do it alone if we continue to qualify people based upon their status as non-offenders. You know, there have been and continue to be exclusive ways of setting up committees and, you know, having advisories in our jurisdictions. And in Ramsey County, we've run into that as we have been believing even more and more today that there is no better set of individuals who can help us understand those collateral consequences and how to unpack those and how to help people more to move beyond trajectories of offending to successful lives than those who have been impacted by our systems. We've run into places where we've been accused of putting unqualified people, if you will, on boards and committees. And it's just really refreshing to have people who understand that we have to give people opportunities to change their lives, and understanding that many of those folks who are in those positions of having been ex-offenders are there because of circumstances in which they have previously been entrapped. So if we think about, you know, the kinds of collateral consequences that keep people from moving forward, not being able to get a job, not being able to, you know, get housing, not being able to get credit in some cases, you know, I just want to rest on some of the things that we found in Ramsey County and have been unpacking. Fines and fees. You know, it is a consequence of having been involved with the system that people are continually charged by the system. And those charges tend to grow, especially if you don't have a job and aren't able to pay, and get added onto year after year after year until you're in this endless circle, you know, chasing those fines and fees around as they chase you around. And so we have been unpacking those in Ramsey County, starting with a fee that you had to pay if you were arrested. I forget what you call it, but that fee was collected at our detention center. And we found a disparity even in how that fee was collected. If you came to jail and you had money in your pocket, we took it and you paid that $25 fee. But if all you had was a credit card, you didn't have to pay because we couldn't figure out how to process that well. We didn't have the staff to process that well. And as we looked back at that and saw over time how many people of means who had credit cards were not charged, and how many low-income people who only had cash in their pockets were charged, we found a reason to eliminate that fee. But then so many other fees, you know, continue to be added on until we have been eliminating all fees in our corrections department recently, so that young people and adults who are in our system are not continually burdened by the costs there and having to make the decision between bread or milk or diapers, you know, or paying a fee or going back to jail. So there have been a lot of ways in which those ongoing injustices continue in our system as collateral consequences, as ways that keep people burdened by the system, as members of a caste, if you will, who are relegated to this position and never able to move beyond. Those who have been most impacted by the system are helping us to find those ways and helping us to continue to eradicate our system of those ways.
Thank you, Tony. Good I agree with everything everybody said. Let me just say a few things real quick. Number one, I mentioned that slavery existed in the United States for 250 years, but it did come to a legal end. Uh, with the Civil War, it was over. 13th Amendment, it was legally over. Now, we know about convict leasing, we know about peonage, we know about all those things, but as a legal matter, it was over. 250 years of Jim Crow segregation. No, 100 years, forgive me, of Jim Crow segregation. But with Brown versus Board of Education, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Immigration Act, and then in 68, the Housing Act, though that Jim Crow came to an end. And then we started a period known as institutional racism, which is what we're living in now. My friends, if we can end slavery and Jim Crow, we can end racism. We can. It's possible. But we got to be earnest and deliberate about doing it. And you guys who are studying debate can really make an important contribution by debating these subjects and really, really challenging. About 25 years ago, we did something, maybe 27 years ago, it's called the Racial Bias Task Force. And we spent money to look at our judicial system and try to say, well, how are we perpetuating racism in the system? And we found judges who really would swear up and down, sideways, and every diagonally that they were not racist. They were against racism. Racism was horrible. They were deeply offended that anybody would say they were racism. But then we whipped out the numbers and it's like, well, you might not think you're racist, but you kind of treat people differently based on their race. And the data was really important because people's subjective assessment of their own fairness often does not fit with what is actually happening. We made some important advances in the area of interpreters, making sure that people can understand the proceedings. I remember a juvenile court proceeding where this kid was in trouble in juvenile court and his parents, he was interpreting the proceedings for his parents. I wonder if he even ever told them what he was accused of. Who knows? But my point is, that there was clearly a bias in the system. And there were really others as well. But one thing the Racial Bias Task Force did not do is it didn't take up policing. And and it didn't deal with a lot of other things that really contribute to the system. Maybe it's time for another racial bias task force. I think it would be a good idea for us to take the temperature after 25 some years. How are we doing? And this is an issue that for you young people, what people don't count and don't measure, they tend not to pay very close attention to. If we don't know how many racially biased stops are happening on the street, we got some sort of an anecdotal idea. Oh, well, not too many. Well, it all depends on who you are. If you were stopped 3 times, you think there's a lot. If you actually are the one who did the stopping, you might think, well, I never stop people for race. But you know what? Just so happens somehow that every time Philando Castile was driving down that road, he got stopped. Like some ridiculous amount of time. John probably knows the number, but I think it's time to do data, do measuring in those things. And then also, let me just say, and this is not Minnesota specific, racial bias in the criminal justice system happens all the time. Has anybody ever heard of 2 really talented actresses, one of them named Felicity Huffman? Who's ever heard of Felicity Huffman? Felicity Huffman was this famous actress, and she was very rich. She's married to a guy named William H. Macy. You might have heard of him because he was the star of Fargo. Well, even though she could provide her kids with the best braces, the best piano lessons, swim lessons, polo lessons, live in a big old giant house, private schools, and everything, that wasn't enough. She literally had to bribe the Stanford and Harvard and Yale and all the rest to get her kids into these fancy schools. Well, you may not have heard of a young lady by the name of Tanya McDowell. I wouldn't blame you if you never heard of Tanya McDowell. I wouldn't blame you if you never heard of another young lady named Kelly Williams Bowler. Who are Tanya McDowell and Kelly Williams Bowler? They're two moms, and they said that they lived in a school district that they didn't really live in. Why did they do this? To get their kid in a better quality school system. Oh, and what happened to them? Prison. Can you believe it? Felicity Huffman gets 2 weeks in jail and embarrassed for literally cheating and defrauding the entire college system. And these women do real hard time because they are low income Black mothers who are trying to see their kid get a better opportunity. Prison, felonies. It's outrageous. Now, it didn't happen in Minnesota, but it sure did happen. And Minnesota is not different from the rest of the country. The sad fact is, we'd like to think we're so different. We're not so different. But I'm saying that, part of the criminal justice system, and this is, I'm going to stop now, part of the problem goes back to what Tony said about caste. And caste is a system that says, like, think of India, where you got the untouchables and you got the Brahmins and you got the people in the middle. No matter how much education or money you get, if you're an untouchable, you will die an untouchable. That's just the way it is. And if you're a Brahmin, you may be an idiot, you may be broken, you may be a bad guy, but you're high caste, so it's okay. In America, we have a caste system, which is why it's so incredibly remarkable that Barack Obama was the president. How could that low caste guy become president? That's what we're really saying. And some idiot like, I don't know, Jared Kushner, he gets into Harvard, even though he doesn't seem very smart at all. The bottom line is privileges and opportunities and harms distributed based on skin color. We can break the system. We've got to go after it. We've got to keep on punching it. And let me just tell you this, when we break the system, we'll have a better country. White people won't be worse off. I guarantee you they won't. And I'm going to tell you why they won't be worse off. Because all of the genius locked up in that little Black girl's mind is going to be shared for the benefit of the whole wide world. The answers, the evil of racism is that there's some little Latino kid sitting up in a detention facility who understands, or one day will understand, how to cure cancer, but we don't let that child make his or her contribution to our world. We limit opportunity only to certain people, which means we only get the genius of certain people. And we literally suppress the genius, creativity, and wonder of other people who might have the most amazing gifts to offer humanity, but their talent never gets developed. So if you really want a better world for everyone of all colors, let the talents and ability, let's cultivate all the talent. Let's let everybody be able to make a contribution, because we will all be better off when they do.
Thank you. That was amazing from all of you. Thank you so much for your responses. I think that it was a very powerful message, especially with the Attorney General, but all of you, it was great to hear. So for a final question of sorts, I want to reference back to the Chauvin trial specifically. When we talk about policing, especially in terms of Afro-Pest, in the debate space, we always reference back to this idea of criminality and how can we rely on a police force to protect Black and Brown communities when they were originally created to harm or detain Black and Brown communities, right? Because the slave patrol eventually morphed into what we call today our police force. But during the Chauvin trial, one of the closing arguments specifically was that it's not anti-police prosecution, but pro-police prosecution. So really what the question I have is, what do you say to people that believe police reform is anti-police, or that changing our police is fundamentally wrong?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have in our society today is that we're posed with binary solutions. We, I think, have a tendency as a society to look at things as either or, that there's nothing we can't see the truth in either side. and people then start to segment themselves off. And I think we need to have a discourse that allows for a greater conversation that goes beyond the binary choice. So in this instance, in terms of what you're kind of putting forward, I think one of the most fundamental things is that we as a society need to take responsibility for where policing is at today. And what I mean by that is that I believe that over the course of the past many decades, policing has been developed and practiced the way that police officers wanted to develop their profession. We were not in many ways paying attention. There's a conversation going on about defund the police. There is something, I'm not a person that would say to defund the police, but there's something there that we all need to pay attention to, which is that the citizens, especially in Minneapolis, of a number of them, are rising up and saying that they don't like how policing is happening in their community and they want alternative ways. And some of the things that they're talking about are actually good ideas. We have put so much on the plate of police. We have asked them to do everything. Ever since the advent of the 911 system, police respond to everything. And we have to recognize that there are other actors in our systems in our community that could also be a response or co-respond with the police. So I think there are solutions that encompass a much greater frame of just saying pro-police or anti-police, but really to think about it in a different light and really to bring people together to address some of these issues, because we're never going to solve them if we're in separate camps and we're looking at things as binary choices. I think that's one of the greatest challenges that we have for our society, is to somehow figure out a way to bring all of that back together in a way that provides safety and wellness for our community. And we have to recognize that policing belongs to us, the people, and we have every right to tell the police that we want you to train on de-escalation. We want you to stop doing this proactive type of policing where you pull everybody over, believing that somehow you're pulling someone over because they might have guns or drugs. The vast majority of times, those stops, pretextual traffic stops, don't yield guns and drugs. But for the most part, people have not been paying attention to that. Only a few people have. And so as we think about all of this, we have to recognize that what the police do is on our behalf. And so that means that we have to take ownership of what happens. And I believe over time, I don't know that the law will change. Graham versus Connor is pretty sound, and I don't see it changing because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. But I believe what is reasonable, because at the end of the day, the standard is what would a reasonable officer do in that situation, an objectively reasonable officer, that must change. And it can only change unless the people take back policing and say, this is how we wish to have policing framed up and done in our community.
I want to thank you, John, and agree very, very much with you. I come from a family where my husband served as a police officer in St. Paul during all of his career. And I would see him off to work sometimes in the evening and not see him again until the next morning, and wonder about what kind of pursuits he would be in the middle of the night. You know, sometimes I lost sleep, but I got a little bit used to having to take care of my own sleep while he was gone. But, you know, he had some harrowing experiences as a police officer, some while he was on duty, and he would come and he would tell me about them. And I have to admire that those police officers who go out to do the duty of protecting and serving all of us as heroes. You know, they are heroes and heroines, if you will, who go out and protect and serve each one of us. And we need to protect them as well as they do their work. My husband would be a first to tell you that community policing is not a new idea. You know, it is the idea of policing in the first place. As John says, the police are us, and we are the police. And we own our responsibility to set the standards by which we will be protected and served. Police officers have to be skilled. You know, they have to have talents. They do need a number of tools on the job. They cannot simply be warriors, you know, in this warrior versus guardian mentality. When my husband left home every day, he had to be a person in the community. He patrolled the area that he lived in. So he would see friends of my children, or he would see people he grew up with, and he had to care as much about them and about their going home as he cared about himself and him being able to go home. So the tools that we need to train police officers in around trauma and acknowledging that they can de-escalate, that they can refer in community even, that they need to know their community. All of that is absolutely necessary. And of course, if you've only got one tool and it's a hammer, every problem is going to be a nail, and we know that isn't the case. As we look to protect our police officers, we want them to not be in those circumstances of making stops that are unnecessary, that we can handle in other ways, like that broken tail light, because we don't want it to escalate to a point where those police officers could be harmed. And we don't want them to be in a position where, because of a reaction of fear and an unnecessary circumstance, they're at the risk of losing their lives, their jobs, you know, their ways of protecting their own families. So I think, yes, we have to recognize that if it isn't working, it won't work for us. And currently, we see in so many circumstances outcomes that don't help us get to the safe community that we need for all of us. It is time to update those strategies and the methods and the standards by which we police our communities. And there are other tools that we can use. We can free up those police officers to be able to respond to those emergency issues, to be able to investigate those serious crimes that we need them to. And so, yes, we can say the police reform is about all of us. It is about the police as well.
Well, this is Keith. I can offer a few thoughts. Here's a little secret folks may not know. There's a lot of people in the police department who think that there needs to be a lot of reform in the police department. In our case, in the State versus Derek Chauvin case, we had police officers come and testify to say what that guy did to George Floyd was wrong. I don't want to be associated with it. It's not what we stand for. It's not who we are. And I don't think a lot of people really understood how much guts it took to do that. I mean, you're really kind of breaking the code, you know, when you did that. But, you know, I think there's a lot of police officers I'm just sick of it. We're not going, I don't want to serve with somebody who is on some macho kick. I want to serve with people who are here to protect the public. And I'll tell you a little story, then I'll stop. There's a woman named Carriel Horn, Caiiol, Carriel Horn, ate like a horn, like a blowing a horn. And you can Google her. And maybe about 15, 20 years ago, she was arresting somebody with her partner who was a police officer. I mean, her coworker police officer. And the guy was just smashing this suspect in the face with his fist. She intervenes to stop it. He punches her in the face. And then if you think she got a commendation because she, intervened to sort of protect somebody, you'd be wrong. She got a condemnation, end up getting fired, losing her pension. She fought for 15 years to get her pension restored, and she just got it back. What's my point? Now we teach officers you must intervene. Now we teach officers you have a duty to intervene. But when she did it back them years ago, she paid a heavy price. And so, for the sake of the officers who put their lives on the line to protect everybody, let's help create a department where they don't have to work next to the macho, the angry, the racist, the mean, because there's no profession in the world where everybody's awesome, right? I'm telling you now, there's no profession where everybody's a joy all the time. And in policing, that is true. And we need to create an environment for the sake of the officers who are there to work and serve the public, avenues where we hold people accountable who are not there to do that. So I'll stop right there.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. I think we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to turn the tables on the moderators and ask them a question too, because these are debaters who have spent hundreds, probably each of them 1,000 or more hours researching these topics. So my question for them, maybe we could start with Tecumseh. What are some of the ideas that you heard or researched this year that would be something you might want to focus on if you could switch places with our panelists? If you were the Attorney General or the County Attorney or the Commissioner of Ramsey County, what are some of the things you as a policy debater would do if you could be a policymaker?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Me personally, in my debate, like in this season, I focused a lot on the theory arguments, like Michael said, was talking about the Afro-pessimism arguments. I also worked a bit on prison abolition as an argument or as a case. So that's probably not the route I would take. My main focus, I say, would be either decriminalization or legalization of certain, crimes, things that we criminalize in today's society, especially like drugs and sex work. I think those are areas that I would want to focus on. And I would also want to focus on juvenile areas and, like you were all talking about during the segment, rehabilitation and getting people support. So, yeah.
Amy, what about you?
Totally agreeing with everything you said, Tecumseh. I think also I would like to see a shift in how we do adult justice so that it is closer to juvenile justice, because I don't think rehabilitation should be cut off at some arbitrary line. Even if we move it up to 25, there are people whose brain development takes longer, and even people with a fully developed brain, I think, deserve the opportunity to grow. So I think a lot of it comes down to totally moving towards rehabilitation and also moving towards a restorative model of community-based justice rather than a retributive model. I'm a restorative practices circle keeper at my school, and every circle we start with the 7 core assumptions, which are the true self and everyone is good, wise, and powerful. The world is profoundly interconnected. All human beings have a deep desire to be in good relationship. All humans have gifts, and everyone is needed for what they bring. Everything we need to make a positive change is already here. Human beings are holistic. We need practices to build habits of living from the core self. And I think if we modeled justice, not just for juveniles, but for everyone, off of the core assumption that we are all trying to do our best and to do better, and we built our system on rehabilitation and on equity, we would see a much safer community as a result.
I think just to add on, I think that definitely like restorative justice and like community rehabilitation was, if not the biggest alternative or proposed plan in debate this year. I think that us as young people in Minnesota, I think we all can agree that our like what the commissioner was saying, that laws need to be flexible. They need to be able to change and not just be a set thing that applies to everyone, one size fits all, as the county attorney said. So I think that would definitely be something I'd focus on, would be building, approaching imprisonment or prosecution more as rehabilitation rather than retribution, right? Like paying for what you did. And then not to sound like too high words or whatever, but definitely Afro-pessimism in debate is what I've been focusing on for the past 2 years. And it would definitely be, if I could switch places with any of you, something I definitely focus on would be identity politics and how that plays into our criminal justice system. Because as it stands now, any person of color really is disadvantaged in our country today when it comes to interactions with courts, with police, with sentencing and things like that. So I think that if I were to switch places, I would go with what the Attorney General was saying was be the creation of a new racial bias task force or a third party that would analyze things like our police departments and our judges and just see like, you know, how is the experience for those disadvantaged in our society? How are they interacting with the system? And is there ways that we can improve it? That's it. Sorry.
Oh, I want to thank you all, the panelists. Thank you to the audience members. I'm just so proud of the debaters and so proud of you all for all that you've accomplished and the amount of time that you spend making this world that we live in a better place. I'd like to give our panelists one last final word before throwing it back to Amy Kram-Helwick. Commissioner Carter, last words.
Thank you so very much. I am thankful for being here and to have had the opportunity to share a few words, but even more so to hear from you and to know about the work that you are doing as you are preparing your knowledge and your capacities to be able to change our systems and make sure that they work for everyone. I just wrote in the chat, thank you so much for being the change.
Attorney General.
You know, I'm just so excited to see the brilliance of our young people just shining on through. You guys are awesome. And, you know, I'm getting up there, man. I'm going to be 58 on my next birthday. And I've been wondering which one of these young ones are going to be the Attorney General one day. And I think we got a lot of choices. You guys are amazing. So thanks for having me, and I'll see y'all soon.
And John Choi, you have any last words here?
Right, thank you. I just feel so privileged to actually be able to be on this panel. I think oftentimes we can learn so much when you listen to perspectives, and so I just appreciate you know, especially the moderators who and the organizers of this event, because I think this is a really important discussion. But I feel very lucky to have been able to be a part of it, but more importantly, to listen to my fellow panelists and to the moderators as well.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. We're incredibly grateful to all of our panelists and as well as our students. You know, my students always inspire me and inspire me to do my best to make a better world, to hand over to them. They're doing really great work. If you are interested to get involved, from volunteering to having your workplace be involved, we always have opportunities and needs for connections. And so you can find out more about that on our website or on social media. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists in the chat, and you know, have a wonderful afternoon. This is inspiring and exciting, and I'm grateful to everyone. Thank you so much.